How deep do we go? Because that's a rabbit hole. Man.
It's hard to actually let yourself speak the truth.
The number one problem with our officials is integrity. The Founding Fathers said integrity is where your thoughts and your words and your actions all line up. And if I don't have those, you shouldn't vote for them. And to me, truth, the Bible says it's better than silver than gold. It's truth. It says, buy the truth in Proverbs 23:23. It says, buy the truth and sell it not. And people nowadays, who's the father of lies? Who's the father of deceit?
Hey friends, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. So how many years have we been talking about the issues with the Institute in Basic Life Principles and the Duggar family and all of their associates? I feel like this has been an ongoing situation for years, and it seems like with the cast of characters involved in this culture, that it's never without something to discuss. Recently, there's been a lot going on when it comes to a couple of friends of Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, Jim and Bobby Holt. Now, a bunch of you know my personal opinion about Jim and Bobby Holt, and it has to do with my own personal experience with Jim Holt and his involvement in Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. And this is going to perhaps, if you live under a rock and you didn't watch Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, you might not know who Jim and Bobby Holt are. If you don't regularly follow my channel, you might not know who Bobby and Jim Holt are. If you didn't pay attention to Josh's trial, you may have no clue who they are. Jim and Bobby Holt played a critical role in Josh Duggar's trial, and Bobby's testimony really helped the prosecution demonstrate to the jury that Josh Duggar had a history of really bad behavior when it came to children, and that he would have been the only person that would have been searching for the type of content that he was searching for online. That testimony by Bobby enabled them to show a pattern of behavior of Josh, which was used as a factor when it came to sentencing. Even though he had never been sentenced previously for what he had been accused of, it was used as a method for the judge to understand what kind of person he was, what kind of ongoing problems he could be to society, and what his sentence should be. And it also plays a role with once he gets released and what his stipulations will be upon release. So Bobby's testimony really did help the prosecution. It didn't necessarily put him in a conviction status. They had a lot of digital evidence and forensics to prove that Josh was the only one that did it. It was her testimony, though, that really sort of gave a better understanding of who Josh was and what he was into, and the horrible things that he had done. And so once she testified, there was a lot of interest in what Bobby and Jim Holt were saying, and they went on some podcasts and they started being more vocal. They started posting a lot on social media. They got involved also with Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. And it was around that time that I had my first, meeting with them or getting to know them type of thing. I don't even know how to describe it. But when they got involved with that show, Jim Holt specifically said to me that his goal with getting involved with Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, was to burn the IBLP down to the ground. That's what he said. He wanted to get rid of all of the bad guys that were in this group, and he was committed to exposing them all. Obviously, what I don't think he had anticipated was that when he became more public, a lot of the problems in his own life would become to the surface. Now, someone who supports the Duggars would say that if bad things happen to someone that speaks out against them, it's like their karma for not respecting their relationship, and it's them not obeying their authorities or whatever, the stepping out of the umbrella of protection and destruction happens. Like, they would say that like Jim had this coming because he wasn't following the principles. Now, what happened to Jim? Well, that story is here. So in April of 2023, his son Samuel filed charges against his dad, and he claimed that his dad attacked him, and this assault occurred in front of his siblings. And he also, Samuel, took out a restraining order against his dad. And the restraining order was granted by a judge after they presented evidence to judge and to the court about what had happened and whatever he had video or photos, I don't know. And the judge granted a 10-year order of protection. At the same time, Bobby Holt was dealing with a problem because her son Samuel had pressed charges against Jim. And she didn't necessarily disagree, I guess, with what happened with Samuel, but she was in a rock and a hard place, because if she didn't file an order of protection, it might look like she's not trying to take care of her kids. It might seem like she's being negligent. And with the possibility of her husband getting charged, she needed to protect herself from legal consequences and the possibility of losing custody of her children. So she also took out an order of protection, and her kids were protected from their dad. Okay, that's where we were. When Shiny Happy People aired in June of 2023, the order for protection was already in place. The accusations that had been made by his son Samuel had been confirmed. A police report or a letter came out from Springdale PD basically saying, yes, the situation is under investigation. So there wasn't anything more. And as far as I could tell, there was no criminal charges filed against him. Now, the state of Arkansas does have some unique rules when it comes to cases that involve minor children. And so some cases that involve minor children, if it's a victim, they are sealed. So I don't know if it happened in sealed court, but from a public perspective, there was no public charges against Jim. So during that period of time, I was getting a lot of messages from people saying that Bobby had only done this to save herself. She wasn't necessarily leaving Jim because she wanted to. And they were questioning whether or not she would actually stay away from Jim. And somehow in the time between April of 2023 and June, after this comes out, and Jim Holt gets separated from Bobby, Jim Holt then goes crawling back to Jim Bob Duggar. I can say this because this is coming from multiple sources, and these are extremely reliable sources, and both have provided me the same account of what happened and the same sort of statements that Jim had made about what was going on and what he was doing. A lot of people were suspecting that Bobby had been influenced by Jim Bob Duggar to drop the restraining order, because in her petition to request the restraining order be dropped, she had mentioned that 4 men had counseled her and Jim separately and provided evidence of his repentance and his remorse, and he was getting help and a therapist letter. And it seemed like the evidence was showing that it was the 4 men that basically convinced her to come back to Jim. After the judge lifted the restraining order against Bobby, who told the court that her children had never been in danger and never been harmed by Jim Holt, which my sources say is categorically false, there was an emergency request made by one of their kids to get the kids out of the home. So here's what's going on. At the end, in December, a judge ruled that Bobby could voluntarily drop her order of protection against her husband. She said she didn't feel like Jim was a threat anymore. She said that she felt like she was safe. She didn't think he was going to do anything to the kids. And when that happened, Jim then also went to the court and filed a motion to modify the protective order that his son Samuel had taken out. Initially, we assumed that it was potentially that Jim Holt might be trying to get his son Samuel to drop the restraining order, but it turned out, according to my sources, that when Samuel filed the order of protection against his dad, his address was the same as his parents' address. He was still living with his parents. And once he took out the order of protection and he got into that issue, had that fight with his dad, he moved out. And so once Bobby requested that the order be dropped, Jim couldn't go home still because he was still barred from going to his home where Bobby was living with the kids. And so a judge then on February 1st modified the address on Samuel's order of protection. So some people were thinking that, he was going to try to get it to be dropped, but Samuel does not want this dropped. And there's zero indication that he's going to drop it anytime soon. Like he wants this to remain in place. But because the judge changed Samuel's address, Jim then was able to move back in with his kids. So as of February 1st, when the order of protection's address was changed to Samuel's new address, that's not his parents' house, Jim was able to move back in with his house with his kids. This move by Jim caused a huge problem with the older adult Holt children, according to my sources. My sources told me a few things about how this all went down. So one thing they said was that when Jim Holt was separated from Bobby, he went back to Jim Bob Duggar and begged for Jim Bob's forgiveness for speaking out against Jim Bob and the IBLP so publicly. And my source alleged that Jim Bob was told by Jim Holt that he only said the things that he said about the IBLP and about Jim Bob for money. And that was his motivation, was money. And that he didn't regret testifying against Josh because it was the right thing to do, but he did regret speaking so ill and poorly of Jim Bob and the IBLP. Which is ironic because in Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, he and his wife talk about how horrible these teachings are and they would never follow them. They would never adhere to them. And then he was like basically telling Jim Bob, I'm so sorry. And once Jim Bob forgave him, then the campaign to get Bobby to forgive Jim Holt began, according to my sources. And so it was 4 guys who are associated with both Holt and Duggar that sort of piled on Bobby and coerced her to take Jim back. And my sources don't know if they also were part of helping her write things very carefully in her request to have it dropped, because it felt like she was being very careful with her wording, because she said, like, he's not harmed our kids to the best of my knowledge, with sort of that a parentheses that maybe there could be something she just forgot about or didn't know. And if something were to happen and say like an investigation, she would be like, I didn't know, you know? So it was the work of Jim Bob Duggar, right? Jim Holt makes a promise, like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm so sorry. I will never speak out against the IBLP. I was totally lying about everything I said on this series. And Jim Bob, please forgive me. I need your help. I want to get back with my family. Please help me get my family back together. Okay, so Jim Holt and Jim Bob are back together, and apparently they are trying to cover up for Jim Holt what he's done to his wife and his children. In the middle of all of this, there's a hit piece coming out called Slandering or Shiny Slander. And it's like this IBLP-esque response to Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. And it appears who's ever making this video, this series, which I'm not going to link to because y'all don't go looking for it. Don't go watch it. Don't give this woman any more views. But the woman in this video appears to have inside information and maybe direct information from Jim Bob specifically, because there's a lot of like, maybe Jim Holt will run to Jim Bob and seek an apology, as though like further down the line, they'll reveal that Jim Holt actually ran to Jim Bob and apologized. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jim Holt gets on camera for this and it was like, yeah, I lied. My concern with Jim Holt's involvement in this series was this moment right here, was that his deception would crack the credibility of that series and impact the real truth that was delivered in that series and diminish the stories of the survivors that bravely shared their stories. When I talked about this a couple months ago, people said that I wasn't respecting the stories of the survivors, and I actually felt like, okay, but if you know the truth about Jim Holt and what's about to come down the pipeline, you'll understand that I do care about the survivors, because they don't deserve to have any credibility taken away from their participation in this series, because I wholeheartedly believe everything that every single one of those victims said. I believe wholeheartedly that they were experienced and did experience harm as a result of the teachings and as a result of being a part of the IBLP and by Bill Gothard himself. I believe it 100%. And I didn't want them to get mixed into this dialogue. Well, if Jim Holt lied, then who else lied? You see what I'm saying? So here we are today with Jim Holt now recanting everything he said on Shiny Happy People. And Now, one of his sons, Spencer, who is, I think he's the second oldest son, he has requested emergency temporary guardianship of his siblings. So the Holts have 3 kids that are under the age of 18. And according to my source, again, who is extremely credible, and I promise you, I'm not making this up, these kids have been subjected to quote unquote every kind of abuse in this home. And when I asked what they meant by that, and I said, do you mean like SA? Has there been SA in the home? Because when someone says every kind, I automatically think, okay, every kind, there's physical, there's emotional, there's verbal, there's spiritual, and then there's the horrific SA. And my source would say they did not want to comment on that, given the fact that there is a trial for guardianship coming up and the possibility that there is an ongoing Department of Social Services CPS investigation into an ongoing situation potentially. And they didn't want to damage the case. So I couldn't confirm what they meant by it, but it made me very uncomfortable, let's just say, when they said that. So they said the kids have faced severe abuse in this house, and it isn't isolated to just the older kids. It's not isolated to the ones that have moved out and that are adults, that none of the kids have been immune to his temper and to his rage, and that all of them have been victimized by it. And they are finally at a point where if their mom isn't going to protect the siblings, they are. And they don't want their siblings to continue to live a life that they all had to live and have to get, come out of into their adulthood with so much trauma. They want it to end. And from what I was understanding, it's been an escalating problem for years. And categorically, they deny that Jim Holt speaking out against Jim Bob has anything to do with what's happening in his home. The reason why all of this is happening is because the older siblings have been fed up and they're not going to take it anymore, according to my sources. And they don't want to cover for their father anymore. And they want him to be held accountable. And they want to protect their siblings. And if the IBLP and Jim Bob are going to link Jim Holt crawling back to him as a sign that he was wicked and evil, and this destruction of his family is a response to him not following the umbrella of authority or whatever, they can just sit and spin, I guess, or kick rocks. I don't know, but that's not the truth. So there's going to be a hearing, a custody hearing set up for Spencer and his parents on February 16th, and a trial. He had requested temporary removal of the children, and the judge decided, I need more information, so let's look at the information first. Let's not make any decisions right now. And when the trial happens, there'll be evidence that it involves 3 children, a daughter that's, I think, 17, and then 2 of the boys. And the hope is just to get the kids out of there and protect them, since Bobby won't protect them. And I think they recognize that their mom is also being, as far as I can tell from my sources, that I think the kids recognize their mom's a victim, but because of her being so coerced and, under the influence of what he's telling her to do, until she can break out of that, they don't feel like she can be there to protect her kids, I guess. I hope she's safe, and it makes me really sick to my stomach to know that if what all of these sources are telling me is true, and I wouldn't put this on my channel if I didn't think it was, but if everything they're telling me is true, that Jim Bob is involved in, again, trying to put a family together that has no business being together, and that, again, his hands are getting dirty in a situation where they're trying to protect the image of a guy, Jim Holt, and not protect the kids, and not worry about the children, and not worried about what is happening with the wife. It's none of Jim Bob's business to be involved in any of this. And these 4 men that counseled Bobby to take him back, I am not a religious person, but since they are, I truly believe that if there is a God and there is a devil, they will get theirs in the next life. They will receive brimstone, fire, and all kinds of pitchforks for not acting like Jesus, because this is the absolute opposite of how Jesus would behave. Jesus wanted people to protect their children, or throw a millstone around their neck and throw them in the lake, in the water, and let them drown. And it doesn't seem like any of these men seem to care about that. It's all about their image, which I'm pretty sure Jesus would say is idolatry, because they're like obsessed with themselves and only worshiping themselves, not him. Okay, so I will keep you up to date about all of this. Do not harass or attack anyone involved in this story. Please be super sensitive. If you are going to report on this, the only thing that I have been sort of asked by anyone involved is that make sure not to share any court records that have any addresses or identifying information of anyone involved in this case, because they don't want to be brought into the middle of it. And it's a safety issue for them. All right, so Jim Holt is back to his nasty stuff. Jim Bob is back to his nasty stuff. And I hope that this means that Jim Holt will never be asked to participate in another docuseries. And I just want to express my deep sorrow to the victims of Shiny Happy People that something like this would have to overshadow anything about your truth. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye.